A lot of European corporations now really care about not having a super long supply chain. The major thing that I saw with raising from LPs is there isn't necessarily any urgency to act. The best guides to early stage entrepreneurs are other early stage entrepreneurs or people that have gone through the journey. I don't think there's specifically a gap at pre-seed. I think there's a sophistication focus level that might be missing at pre-seed, and I link that to sort of the operator entrepreneur piece of this. Companies that raise quickly tended to create better returns for the fund. So we kind of automated that or institutionalized that rule. I think selling any fund right now that doesn't have like multiple track records over like 10, 20 years is going to be met with, what's the right word? Like friendly skepticism.
Alex, welcome to the show. Thank you to Norrsken for having us in their beautiful, beautiful office in Barcelona. You were in the news recently for the fund, right? So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the future of climate tech. You have, I guess, a contrarian thesis, or at least a different thesis. I want to talk about Norrsken Evolve, what it's all about. I want to talk about your background as an operator as well, and also why and how you were oversubscribed as a fund, which is quite unusual in this landscape today. That sounds like a good agenda.
Sounds awesome. Thank you for having me.
If you go around conferences this day and you talk about climate and you ask people, hey, how is your fundraising going? Most people will say it is tough, I'm having a hard time, LPs are not reactive. How do you explain that you were oversubscribed?
So let's start with like climate. So I have the privilege of living through the clean tech wave, right? So let's go to like 2005 period. I was at a $1 billion fund called Climate Change Capital that was investing across asset classes. So we've sort of seen this evolution of like what's investable, what's not, how to talk about it. So you had the clean tech wave followed by that 2009 crash, right? And that clean tech wave sort of dries up, goes away. Fast forward to 2015, you have the climate tech wave. Some of the exuberance of that climate tech wave was built on things I don't necessarily believe are particularly kind of meaningful, or things we learned, I think, in 2005 to 2008 that can be very negatively affected by the economy. So carbon credits, things like that, regulations. You know, we want to kind of assume, so I'm a huge environmentalist, right? Really care about this stuff. And we want to assume that climate tech is always going to be marching in the right direction, that regulation's always been going in the right direction, that companies are going to care about this, that people are going to care about this, right? It turns out when you go through economic cycles, which are pretty frequent and like pretty predictable, like we see them coming, a lot of the, let's call it non-realist bits of that fall away. So does that regulation get pushed through? Yeah, maybe not, right? Does that corporate continue to care about its ESG emissions reductions? Maybe not, right? Maybe now it's under pressure from its board about like staying alive. So we sort of seen that, like I'm 42, right? So we saw that in the 2000s and we kind of saw that again now. And it's very like fascinating to me, being an investor in both periods with a big operating stint in the middle, to just kind of observe some of those repeated conversations. And it was pretty clear in 2020 to 2023 that if this economic climate change, some of this stuff is not going to work. Right? Like, do we believe in the big corporate emissions reductions purchase agreements at times when their customers are not caring about that because, by the way, the world around their customers changed and they're worried about inflation, they're worried about war in the country next door, they're worried about are their kids going to have jobs because AI is now starting to impact the entry-level labor market, right? The things that we care about as people sort of change, and it's cyclical and it's economic driven, it's political driven, politically driven as well, because that should be in many ways like a result of those things, right? So that was probably not a great answer. So climate tech, clean tech, yes, we've lived through it once, we lived through it again.
Do you think that we've lived through the exact same phases?
So it's always different, right? The difference now in Europe specifically is now we have geopolitical conflict on our doorstep. That wasn't there in 2005. right? 2005, you're more talking about the UN, about the strength of like international institutions, right? About the strength of like the Kyoto Protocol and all the UNFCCC conferences that follow it. That was sort of the vibe. It was very optimistic. 20, then now the main difference is I think people don't, I mean, I personally, let me talk from a personal point of view, don't necessarily believe that some of these international structures are meaningfully operating today. Like, doesn't mean the intentions are wrong, right? It doesn't mean that we shouldn't do those things, but are they having influence? Right? Who is having influence? So that it's very different. And now it's much more. I use this word realism a lot. Right? It's much more about the things that matter, kind of day to day, week to week. Right? Do we have electricity? Do you have materials? Right? That type of topic resonates a lot more. So it depends really how you talk about climate tech, because technology is just technology. Right? Like, what is your thesis around it? I think for me that is a more nuanced answer. And it's not the same, but that my initial thoughts on that.
What did you sell to LPs to convince them?
Yeah. So we use the word sustainability, which is all of the climate tech things, right? But when we talk about it, we talk about how this meaningfully drives economic activity, right? That's the first lens. Right? So a company we invested in this year, Recouper, they're French. You should meet them. They're awesome. They're taking very low quality recycled scrap copper, which we have a ton of in Europe lying around. And they're using a very smart machine learning and system of electrons to make it more conductive, right? So that takes low quality scrap into high quality copper. Where do we use high quality copper? Batteries, electronics, super valuable things. Where do we get our copper from today? 98% not European, right? Like all coming from quite polluting smelting and industrial facilities far away. Would it make sense to have a cost parity, high quality supply of copper? Like, yeah. Is that also really good for the environment? Absolutely. Right. There's nothing more circular than that, and you will never find a lower emission supply of copper.
Hmm.
So that's what I mean by economically meaningful.
Yeah. So let's do the same. Let's use the same material, same price, same everything. Let's just replace it with something more sustainable.
Yeah. And guess what? I think a lot of European corporations now really care about not having a super long supply chain. Like, you saw COVID, the Suez Canal. It's very easy to have your products like stop,
Yeah.
right? So you want diversification, you want sources of supply of materials. If you're producing those materials in Europe, let's say, or closer to home, which by the way has a lot of like political tie-ins, right? When you think about what's going on in the world, rise of the right, like we kind of want jobs, we kind of want materials, we want industrialization or reindustrialization. If you're doing that here, we don't have a lot of kind of fossil fuels, hydrocarbons left in the ground anymore. So it kind of necessitates that you're using renewable energy to do those things. So this is really starting to talk about a shift in industrialization. Like, how do we rebuild our productive capacity, like, is the word I use a lot. And how, like, what are the preconditions for that? And it turns out that's kind of very, very heavily overlapping with climate tech and renewable energy.
It's a mix of let's do things locally because we need them, because we don't want to rely on the rest of the world to procure materials and climate. That's the intersection of where you sit right now.
Yeah, and so I have a master's degree in international relations, right? So if you look at the political cycles, you have periods of opening, liberalization, free trade, and you have periods of closing. Like, these things happen again quite regularly, quite cyclically. We're clearly now in a period of closing, right? Moving stuff across borders is harder. You're going to get tariffs. You're going to get non-trade barriers. You're going to get all these like weird economic things that frankly mess with businesses. I think we've seen that pretty clearly, over the last 6 months. In that period where you have lots of unknown risks, people try to reduce them, and you want to, in a period of closing, you produce stuff closer to home, right? You don't necessarily think that the system of international production and trade holds, and we're kind of there.
Mm.
And that's how I think about a lot of the businesses we're seeing in Europe today.
If we go back to that copper example, what's the next stage? Because in the startups world, you often talk about going global and like winning the world and whatnot.
Mhm.
If we think about that example, is it the main goal to only procure copper for Europe and that's it, and we'll stop at the European borders?
So I think that you're gonna see regionalization, but then you're going to see multi-regions,
Hmm.
right? I mean, this is not a new thing. Could Google go into China? No, right? Like they've never been in China. This is not viable. So you've already seen in the internet's world, like Internet 1.0, 2.0, AI today, you already see like the regionalization of activity, of company expansion. So that's like not new. Like it's been happening for a while. Um, I think that you are going to see regional champions. Is there any reason they can't be multi-regional champions or like half the world champions? Not necessarily, right? Like why? Like they're not going to be global. But I want to go back to the internet companies in Internet 1.0 weren't actually global. There were big regions where they didn't have footprint or weren't allowed to have footprint. So I don't think that's a new thing. Do I think it is a bit more prevalent now and you should think about it more in like how you're growing your business? Yes, I do. I think you should have a plan in mind about, okay, if we do well, like where do we go? Good news is that's like a good problem, actually.
Of course, yeah, yeah. If you have that problem, that means that you're already in a great situation.
Yeah, I think so.
If we go back to that fund that you've raised, I guess I still want to dive into why do you think you were successful and others are not, type of question. So,
Hmm.
um, when I looked at your LP base of at least the information that's available online, so you have a Swedish government entity, you have the EIF. Do you think those people backed you because they wanted to build Europe with you, or do you think it's more for the climate aspect, or is it a mix?
I mean, they have specific mandates, right? So every institution like that is looking at maybe a country, maybe a region, and maybe a topical mandate of some kind, right? So that's these types of mandates arrive with institutional investment. You know, you're just kind of on the receiving end of that and looking for the ones that are the best match. Um, so the institutions, we have three, right? We have EIF, we have Sam Invest, which is kind of the Swedish investor, and we have SmartCap. Um, they were collectively, like a decent chunk of the fund. I forget, like 40%, around that number, and the rest isn't. So that why did they care? Well, actually, they didn't initially. The initial responses for emerging managers. I think selling any fund right now that doesn't have like multiple track records over like 10, 20 years, like we don't have that. Any emerging manager is going to be met with, what's the right word? Like friendly skepticism.
Mm.
Like, well, no one really cares that much about what you're doing or why you're doing it. We've had a flood of, I mean, emerging managers basically means people doing VC for the first time,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And like, guess what? There's loads of them. Everyone looks like awesome. Like, you look at CVs, X, Y, Z. Like, what is the differentiation? The funds, look, there's differentiation there, but there's like buckets of similarities. Is this like a solo GP model? Is this like going for like a more traditional fund structure? So I would say in the beginning, we also had the same response. Everyone's like, interesting. We don't really think this is going to fly. There's like the word you hear a lot as an emerging manager is that, oh, yeah, we've got a strong pipeline and there's a lot of competition. And this is, I think, true of life. Like there's always going to be a strong pipeline. There's always going to be a lot of competition. Um, so we started out in that place.
Mm.
Um, I have heard lots of people not being able to get to where they want to in terms of raising a fund. I have heard lots of funds that have got there too, right? What are the differences? I think it's like everything is like a unique case.
Yeah.
You know,
How long was the process?
um, well, about 18 months, right? Like I would say 2 years really end to end, thinking like with the thinking time,
Hmm.
the thinking and the iteration and getting feedback time, and then 18 months actually raising. Um, I believe that is relatively on point for an emerging manager. I don't actually know. I get asked this question a lot. I don't know. I don't know what the average time taken should be. I don't know how hard it should look. We had to build quite meaningful relationships as quickly as possible. Um, and the major thing that I saw with raising from LPs, um, is there isn't necessarily any urgency to act. You know, imagine seeing 1,000 great options, of which we are one. None of this seems time pressured. Like, why would you move? So you kind of have to build a lot of relationships, a lot of momentum, and I think you need to get their attention somehow? Like, how do you create signal? How do you stand out in a really, really overpopulated playing field?
What was your way of doing that?
So I think our fund, so we're a little bit different. So I am an operator, right? So I've like operated a few companies that have done reasonably well. Johan Atzby, he's a serial founder, raised over 100 million, founded two companies very successfully, exited both of them. And then we have Rebecca, who is a career VC, right? But has also been a CFO and operated. So we have this point of view that at the early stages of venture capital, most likely the best guides to early stage entrepreneurs are other early stage entrepreneurs or people that have gone through the journey. It's like, if you haven't done that, the problems, the chaos, oh my God, don't look under the hood kind of scenario in which most pre-seed companies are, right, in their first 12 to 18 months of existence, you sort of need to be okay with that, right? And the questions you ask and the way you help and the help you need, we think that is best provided in our experience by other operators, other founders, hopefully ahead of you, right? And have done stuff and can tell you, don't do this, do this. This is what I did. And not necessarily from people that haven't done that. I think kind of the skills you develop, let's call it in the quote unquote professions, right? Investment banking, consulting, accounting. I think that type of like very heavy numerical analysis becomes very relevant later, but at early stage, it's not, what are we analyzing here, right? What are the numbers to look at? So we come from that point of view. The best help are other operators, other entrepreneurs, and we heavily lean into community, right? And developing a sense of wanting to help, right? And you want to help because you yourself have been helped.
Yeah.
Right. So we really care about the human connection, about the community of operators, and about that community's ability and our ability to help because we've, at some level, walked through whatever horrible valley that you find yourself in if you're a company we work with.
Something else on the LP base, which I find interesting, is the family office of Skype was part of the cap table and Wise as well. How do you approach these people differently, I guess, from institutional LP?
So and I love Tabat and Sten specifically, though this is Scala. So I don't know you approach them. So the meeting with these two wonderful humans in that family office was they came to Norrsken House in Stockholm. I was there and I said hello, and then we started talking about what they're doing in Estonia. They started getting interested in the work we were doing, and then we just built a relationship from there. I think the really interesting click with their team was they were looking at a lot of the very early stage investors, especially ones that kind of run experiences at some level. And they had not seen a lot of operator kind of entrepreneur teams. So there was an immediate like, okay, yes, we almost see that you have lived through similar experiences, and we really believe that those types of experiences are helpful. And then it's relationship building. We had like lots of phone calls, lots of chats. They gave us lots of feedback. And then we kind of align on, we would love to work together. And I also want to talk about the work they're doing in Estonia, because they're really building that ecosystem in an incredible way, like deploying a lot of capital and time and attention and love to create a technology hub there. Which is called Greenhouse in English. I'm not going to talk about it I'm not going to say it in Estonian. I'm very bad at languages, very, very bad at languages. But the work they're doing there is amazing, and we're very excited to be a part of that down the line. So there was just a lot of alignment, and the answer to the question is we didn't approach them, actually.
It's just serendipity. You have to be at the right place at the right time.
I mean, what's the phrase? Like surface area for luck.
Yeah.
Maximize that.
Interesting. And how much of a role do you think the Norrsken brands helped in that process? Because obviously you have this, I guess, portfolio of approaches that is famous and well, I mean, obviously, like we are in Norrsken Barcelona right now. Like you see the size of the office, you're like, oh my god, like, that is huge. So,
Yeah.
how much do you think that helped you on that
Yeah,
journey?
yeah, yeah. So let's start that by talking about structure, because
Hmm.
I don't know everyone is fully going to be familiar with kind of how Norsken, or it actually means Northern Light in Swedish, by the way. So there is a foundation at the kind of top of this. That foundation was created by Nicholas Edelbert, one of the co-founders of Klarna. That foundation has the goal of creating an ecosystem for early stage impact entrepreneurs to thrive. Right, amazing goal. Does a lot of things. One of its key activities is the Norrsken houses, right? And these Norrsken houses are, if you've never been in one, go. They're incredible. I'm sitting in one right now. I'm looking at the window at like the Mediterranean Sea in Barcelona. This may or may not be my favorite one, but the other ones are amazing as well. So Stockholm, Brussels, Barcelona, actually Kigali, Rwanda, and some more coming. I'm not sure when they'll talk about it, but there will be additional activity. So these are run by the foundation, and they're beautiful co-working spaces, ecosystem hubs, not designed to make money, right? Designed to create ecosystem. Now, the foundation also lends its name and acts as an LP to a series of funds, and we're one of those funds. Each of those funds is independent. So the question is, how much was the Norsken name kind of helpful in the fundraising process? And like, of course, helpful, right? Like it's a known name. Where it's very helpful is like getting your foot in the door to have a conversation. Once your foot is in the door, it is really up to you.
Mm.
And what we found is that a lot of the time, the first conversation was like, no, thank you. And then you have to work from there, right? So, um, helpful, but does it mean that someone shows up with a fund for you? Like, absolutely not. The GP teams are fully responsible for developing the capital and kind of making this happen. Um, so yes, super thankful for the foundation, super thankful for the ecosystem.
Mm.
That's huge. Like it's a wonderful ecosystem for anyone building kind of in climate tech impact space. Go to a house.
Yeah, for sure. And just so that I understand correctly, so is the foundation an LP in the fund?
The foundation is an LP in the fund, small LP.
Did they commit it first?
They do commit first,
Okay.
but then you have basically a long discussion with the foundation team about what is the strategy, what are you doing, how does this work, how does this fit into the ecosystem, and why should they do it, right? Uh, and it is very important to point out that the work we're doing sort of grew out of the work being done before
Mhm.
by the foundation. So there's some historical roots there. And so we're very excited to continue to invest
Mm.
in pre-seed companies.
Talking about pre-seed, I wouldn't say I was surprised, but the more I talk to LPs, the more I realize right now they all want to finance growth funds because no one's there to
It's a
finance a
big
growth
gap.
company.
Yeah.
So there's a big gap. I wasn't quite sure about the gap at the pre-seed. It feels like there are a lot of early stage investor, although some of them come a bit later, like seed series A. Do you think there was a gap specifically at pre-seed?
I don't think there's specifically a gap at pre-seed. I think there's a sophistication focus level that might be missing at pre-seed. And I link that to sort of the operator entrepreneur piece of this, right? So I think you've had a lot of early stage activity in Europe as a whole. You've had a lot of early stage activity that I don't know was super helpful, right? If I look at some of the cap tables or equity stakes, or how entrepreneurs were kind of worked with in the early days. So I spent about 10 years in Silicon Valley. Johan, about the same. As I said, like very focused on being operator and founder driven, and making sure companies we invest in can actually have a successful journey. And I think once you take a pre-seed stage 20+% of someone's cap table for probably very questionable value, you've got a problem. So you have a sophistication gap, right? Not everywhere, but enough.
What's the right way of doing it? How
What's the
much or how much percentage should you
Oh man,
take?
this gets into the world of fund modeling, right? And so that's like, how big is your fund? What's your initial ticket? What's your follow-on strategy? Every VC fund promises 3x return, right? So how do you get 3x return and 20% IIR given your strategy and given what you can do? So for us, we take, I guess, a less concentrated approach. Like we're going to build a portfolio of like plus 50, target 80
Mm.
companies in 3 years. We have a small initial ticket, 250,000. That means we are a relatively small owner on the cap table. Like we're not going to be buying 20% of your company. We're buying less than 20% of your company. Therefore, we're not going to take a board seat, right? Because we're not going to be a material over, but we will maintain our ownership over time for the companies doing well, right? So for us, that math works, and it matches how we look at the world, and it matches what we think is sort of a cutting edge portfolio construction. If you look at a lot of like the solo GPs or micro funds, this is kind of where the world has gone, right? Portfolios of plus 50, maybe smaller initial tickets and then following winners. We've been told, right, again, not experts, that for an emerging manager team, that's actually a pretty sensible strategy and can make sense. So that's how we looked at it. But I think every person making their own fund just has to have their point of view, right? And then you need to go back and back that up with evidence. So had we done that here, what would have happened? So there's loads of different ways to do it. Ours was a particularly kind of strange one, which is, I think, one of the reasons why we got a lot of no's for like quite a long time when we started.
How do you pick the winners? Obviously, your job right now is going to be to invest in a lot of companies, already select them from the get-go, of course, but then the big question is, where do you follow on?
Yeah, talk to me in 10 years and I'll give you the 2020 vision of hindsight. Answers a lot of questions. How do you pick? So our follow-on strategy, like we base this on historicals and kind of our own experience, was that if for a pre-seed company, momentum seems very important right now. So companies that raise quickly when we looked at our numbers, tended to create better returns for the fund. So we kind of automated that or institutionalized that rule. So if you increase your valuation 50% between the last post money and the new pre, we will follow and we'll maintain our share. So super simple. Not been done before that we know of. So it's like an interesting chat, right? When you're like, hey, would you like to invest in the fund? By the way, this is how we're going to do that.
Interesting. So that's really a numbers-driven approach that you're taking.
Yes. Well, if you think about any small team, right? So if you have like a 50 to 75 million fund, you're going to have maximum 5, 6 people. So a lot of those funds, a lot of the smaller funds do have portfolios of plus 50. How are you really making your decision, right? How are you really looking in depth at that company and saying, wow, if we do this bridge or if only this small thing changes, you know? So we didn't want to fool ourselves that we were going to make a good decision that wouldn't probably be massively based on emotional bias. Like we spend time with our entrepreneurs. We want relationships. We want to know you. We want to be on your team. But you got to recognize that caring about people and actually caring about these companies creates huge bias. So like, who are we to untangle that, right? We're like massively imperfect humans. Dealing with imperfect capital markets, imperfect information, companies with huge dreams, founders with such ambition to like move the needle in the right direction. This was a headache that didn't make sense to tackle.
Going back to the idea of being an operator before being a VC, so obviously, as you said, you have quite a great track record actually at scaling companies all the way through the end. Like, how do you transfer that knowledge that you've learned through the years into a job where your job is to return capital, not to grow a company?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, LPs, especially more sophisticated ones, want your track record. And your track record is everything, right? If you bought and sold a mountain bike for enough profit, like, let's hear about it. So if you take my track record as an example, actually, I have returned capital to myself. So that counts. I've done quite a few angel investments. So has Johan, and Rebecca has done a lot of investments too. But I don't. Yeah, it's not. Look, we're for early stages, so I don't know how this will play out. I have confidence that we can make good decisions and return capital. I think we have collectively a ton of experience in generating value, right, in companies and also on the investment side. So we'll see how it plays out. I'm reasonably confident as you can be in like month 2 of new fund.
Yeah, and that's maybe the magic sauce there, which is like the combination of your experience together, which is quite different from like you're an operator. One of your co-founder was more of a founder, and someone else is more of a VC type of
Hmm.
profile. That combination probably is what makes this work.
It's a lot of fun. You should hear the conversations.
For sure, I wish I was in the room. Look, one last topic for you today. I was reading some of your recent interviews for other media companies that I'm not going to name. Um, I felt like people wanted you to say that you're going to invest in guns and defense and drones that kills humans. That's not how I read the situation, but why do you think people want to push you in that direction somehow in the media story?
Like, I think this word, whenever you use a word, it's like, what does it mean? Right? So like I actually have a problem with the word impact. What does it mean? Right? If you really dig into it in terms of asset classes, what you're trying to do. So there's a word we've been using for a while called resilience, right? That word has now been used in many other like surrounding fields. So like I think people read that and it's like, oh, a thing. Like let's try and dig deep on this one and see what's going on. Just for clarity, like we don't invest in weapons. We don't want to invest in weapons. Anything that causes destruction, I don't think is beneficial, right? That being said, I have a lot of experiences where like knowing what's going on around you is kind of helpful, right? So
Hmm.
we invested in a company this year, Bubble Robotics. They are mapping underwater infrastructure, right? Like first use case, wind farms, right? Like wind farms fail, underwater cables carrying electricity need to be there. So this is what we sort of mean by resilience.
Mm.
Like we're absolutely not, and there's some horrible words here. Words like the kill chain, right? Words like I'm not even going to get into it. So we don't do that. I think the word resilience has been picked up, and I understand it. We're in a period of war,
Mm.
right? Europe isn't in its like World War II. Everything's fine, ever growing, ever closer union, like unprecedented peace. We're not in that period. There's war on the doorstep,
Yeah.
right? So there is, rightly so, a lot of
Mm.
investment going into that. Most of that investment, or a large chunk of that investment, is actually just like stuff you want,
Mm-mm.
right? Like you probably want to know what's going on and to make sure you can make enough electricity and that you have all the right materials. And then some of it is different, right? Some of it is attack oriented. So we don't do that. And from my past operator experiences, I was at a space technology company for a while where we had the same type of question to answer, the same kind of line to walk. But no, we don't do weapons. But I don't mind being asked it. It gives me an opportunity to talk about all the other amazing stuff that we need to do.
No, for sure. I just think that that there's a narrative right now in Europe that every climate fund is going to become a defense fund, and that I think is pushed by the media, not particularly by
So
funds
I
themselves.
think it's about words, right? So when someone says dual use, right, what does that mean to you?
Dual use for me would be like civil slash commercial use plus military use, right?
Well, okay, let's talk about it. That second bucket is like government bucket, right? On like in that government bucket, there is military. Like in the military bucket, there is just like logistics, driving your truck around, right? There's fuel, there's like communications technology. There's lots of slices of that dual use before you get into military, and then in military before you get to stuff that is, let's say, really tough.
Mm.
And so I just think our vocabulary is a bit unsophisticated. Like, I would love for people to ask me, hey, are you going to invest in technology that can be directly applicable to the kill chain? And is that all you're going to do? Right? That's a great question because it shows a ton of sophistication around what is dual use.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm just saying this because I would really like the community as a whole to get a lot clearer.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I was actually reading your website before this interview, and the verticals you mentioned are all we generate energy, we build manufacturing, move goods, construct buildings, produce food, treat our sick.
Yeah.
And then one part which I thought was interesting is secure our information or protect democracy. What about that
Yeah.
part?
Yeah. Yeah. So our cyber situation is not good.
Hmm.
So I built a fintech in Amsterdam that we sold. And that experience showed me that our information and financial products are not safe. And you have to go to a lot of efforts to keep them safe. And there is a lot of very sophisticated attempts to mess with information, right? To create disinformation, like to commit fraud. I think that's super important. And I really think that we should be focusing on how do we keep our information safe. And then on the democracy side, what we're really talking about is how are people getting their information? It comes through their feeds, right? Like who is controlling the feed?
Hmm.
It is very wealthy companies that can buy ad space, right? This isn't talking about the weapon side of it, but I can also understand why it gets read that way.
No, for sure not. And it's not how I'm reading it, but very, very interesting. Well, look, I guess we got to the end of the topics I wanted to cover today. Is there something that I didn't ask you about on Norrsken Evolve that we should talk about?
You should talk about actually, you shouldn't talk to me, but you should ask the people, the founders we invest in. Go ask them about us, and then let me know what they say. We are very feedback centric and very focused on making sure that we do things that are helpful. So
Amazing.
for while you're here, go find them. They have awesome companies. You'll have a good time.
Sounds good. Well, Alex, before I let you go, first thing is if I'm a startup or a founder, I want to contact you. What's the best way to reach out?
You should just ping me on LinkedIn. Just find me there. I'm responsive. You can go to the website. You can ping us there too.
Okay, amazing. And then last question for you: who's the next person that should be in your seat for a discussion around investing in climate?
Dun, dun. Investing in climate. Next person. Have you done any companies, or are you focused on investors?
For now, focusing on investors. The company side of it's going to come later.
Yeah. Okay. So Max Bray.
Interesting. Love Max. He's great.
Have you talked to him?
I had Max and Philip, the other Max, but might want to talk to Max as well. He's an interesting guy.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much for today. For people that stayed through the entire interview, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're on YouTube, or to give us a 5-star review and a follow on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's been a pleasure, Alex. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.